Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me enormous pleasure to introduce to you a man whom most of you have already met and admired, Professor Juan Sola. He has been a foreign member of the Center on Capitalism and Society since December of 2008 and has spoken at a handful of our conferences over the years. As a lawyer with a doctorate in economics, he specializes in constitutional law and has served as a co-judge for the Federal Administration Court of Appeals in Argentina. He is now Professor Emeritus of Constitutional Law and the Director of the Center of Law and Economics at the University of Buenos Aires. Juan, I am sure, is the greatest world authority on the subject of corporatism. What's that? He will tell you. He published an excellent paper, The Reaction Against Individualism and the Remote Origins of Corporatism, on the topic of the Center's journal, Capitalism and Society, back in November of 2018. We've had many deep conversations over the years, and in 2020, I had the joy of co-authoring an op-ed with him, What's the Matter with South America, published in Project Syndicate. He's a member of the National Academy of Moral and Political Sciences in Argentina and the National Academy of Law and Social Sciences of Buenos Aires. A recipient of the Eisenhower Exchange Fellowship, and he has published in Jurisprudencia, La Ley, La Nación, and elsewhere. He has authored several books in Spanish. I thought those were Spanish. I didn't write this. Including
shouldn't delegate.
Next time I'll get a substitute one. Including Constitution and Economy and judicial control of constitutionality, and several other volumes, such as the one entitled Treaty on Constitutional Law, and another titled Treaty of Law and Economics. He's a huge figure, not only in Argentina and South America, but in the world of intellectuals. Juan, take over.
Dear Ned, thank you for your extremely generous words, but on top of that, I would say thank you because you indicated the subject many years ago. We know corporatism very well because, as Martí said, in other circumstances, we know the monster because we live in its entrails. But it was Ned who suggested that we should start studying corporatism because it's coming back. When I first spoke about the subject years ago in the center, it was considered a bit of intellectual history. I'm afraid, unfortunately, that there is this revival of corporatism, which is, of course, perplexing. Why would a society in the world return to this terrible system? First, a new spectre is haunting the world. It's no longer communist like in 1848. It is corporatism. Why? Because it's a new justification for despotism. First reason. Socialism in the past was a great justification for autocracies. It's a way that a leader would have a sole party, no elections. And this old system came back as a milder form of an ideology that will help authoritarianism. Why? Also, well, it prevents political and economic competition. Corporatism thinks that this is much better to have an agreement than have competition. Competition itself is bad. Why? Because stability is better than social conflict. Capitalism is considered to be a source of social conflict, both between companies that compete, legitimate, and between trade unions and companies. So the way it was thought, and it was thought of very many years ago, as we shall see, is that we can find a system that we would give stability to the economic, but also to the political system. Basically, the idea of corporatism is hierarchy. Mussolini's magazine was called Hierarchia, but that's nothing to do really with fascism. But the idea that power comes from the top to the bottom and not the other way around. An organized society. The word organized society is coming, it has an Argentine origin, as Perón mentioned it first, but it was taken throughout the world. The word unanimous collaboration of professions is come from Pius XI, no? When, not in Quadragesimo Anno, in another encyclical, he mentioned that there must be a way that we stop competing, that we can collaborate and solve the problems between agreements, that would rectify and adjust the punishing economic competition and pluralism, because both economic competition and pluralism bring differences. They bring moments of disunion, and we should have a unified society, that we should see the idea of unity is the traditional basis of corporatism. The first and most important myth, political myth, in the sense of Georges Sorel, is unity. We should go for the unity. Since everyone has to have a story in the back, medieval corporations are considered useful. Why we don't have medieval corporations? Because they were destroyed, basically by Le Chapelier, by the French Revolution, but also the American Revolution. And this, I must say, the American Revolution has created an important reaction in corporatist traditional authors, because it was Protestant. And as you know, Protestants are the enemy of God. And I thank Ned that invited me to speak of Luther. No? I'm not a Lutheran, of course. But this idea that religion could bring the possibility of the individual, and the individual have power, and the individual represent themselves, and it's the basis of democracy and economic system. So these are the enemies. These are the first enemies that, in a way, destroyed this world of unity that existed before these revolutions. And what does unanimous collaboration profess to do is rein the egotism of capitalism. This is a new phrase by a former bishop. No. Yeah. A former bishop now is very popular in Rome, being the Pope. But this idea that capitalism is the basis of egotism, and egotism is a sin. It goes against the will of God. It thinks that you could be against God. Anyway, I'm not speaking of theology, just this joint, things that go jointly. So, the restoration, how it comes. Hilaire Belloc uses this definition: a better distribution of property and public control of monopolies. Because property, we shall not trust property, because property brings difference with the people. It brings crisis. So we find a new difference. How we replace it? The essence of corporatism, that's what is so common. You replace contracts because you distrust contracts. Why do you distrust, have no confidence in contracts? Because people don't know what is best for them. People are, in a way, ignorant. We shall go back to the... So we should replace contract. I mean, we leave the existence of contracts, but it should be very actively regulated and replaced by regulation, by statute law. Contracts exist, but they are very regulated. And then by hierarchy. Hierarchy in organizations that, in a way, indicate how people should contract without the freedom that it's so common in the United States. I wouldn't say, if you explain contract law, American contract law, to some South American lawyers, they will be very surprised that you trust contracts so much. Anyway, competition fosters crisis, 2008, that's why the 2008 is an important date in the establishing of corporatism, breed egotism, arrogance of the rich, arrogance of the powerful, and inequality. So we have to avoid disorder in business. We have to be some control, some agreement. And it is considered the third way. That, in a way, was established as a third way between capitalism and socialism. But it's an important point to quote here. It was always considered not rightist, not conservative, not progressive. In a way, it goes far away left and right. So you will find corporatists who consider themselves leftists. They go with Putin, but they consider him from the left. And I will give example in a minute. First thing is the myth of unity. The myth of unity means against who is our enemy? It's very important to understand this point of unity because it indicates that we have the people undefined, we, the good, have enemies. The enemies, for example, it was considered in a word created in Italy, but more or less used in South America, partitocrazia, no? The government of parties, the government not of the unity, but of parts of the unity, the divide unity. And so what we can offer in unity, of course, propose to employers to have better salaries, punishing layoffs, and in compensation, we give tariffs in peer competition, foreign especially. It was an Argentine, Prebisch, who established the first and most important doctrine of a closing economy, and also others. So, and then it's an important point, limit new enterprises. How? With excessive labor costs. The regulation is so strong that a company of 500 employees has the same regulation that one with one employee. So you can imagine a small company cannot succeed in competing. Regulation is the basis. And it punishes beginners and innovation. Innovation should be made in an agreement of the state, of the government, with with trade unions and with companies. That is a tripartite hierarchical organization. You may remember the Carta del Lavoro. I don't know if it rules in Italy, it rules in Argentina. The Carta del Lavoro, Argentine version, still applicable. Not only in Argentina, of course, but this is exact. So, what is this tripartite organization? Well, we should replace, in reality, government by this idea of big corporation, let's say, organized and hierarchical big companies with centralized trade unions, and the state, the government, acts as a regulator, an arbiter. So we have the interest groups, the capital, of course, labor, the church. But I not only mean the Catholic Church, but I mean religious idea would give some sort of moral justification to corporatism. And which is based on one, import substitution. Import substitution is one of the centers of corporatist ideas. It started after the crisis, but then it has a twist. It creates a new oligarchy. Extremely rich, protected businessmen and extremely rich trade unionists. Corruption, but not only corruption. They're also, in a way, they have their own companies. Sometimes you are surprised. And then the other point is entitlement. Entitlements is also a central thing, that we are part of the people, we are entitled to receive certain benefits. Eva Peron used a fantastic word which says, where is a need, there is a right. When there is a need, a right, I mean, the state has obligation to help you. It's not something that is given to you, it's something you have the right to. And if they are not, you're... And then there is the new myth, this idea of inequality as the cause of poverty. You know poverty much better than I do, but very powerful point that, you know why we are poor? We are poor with something is taking our part. Someone is having my part, so that's why I'm poor. And that's, of course, an extremely powerful myth. Oh, it stopped working. Sorry? Middle? Not right? How do you do? Lizzie? Because I want to, there are two points that I would like very much to put. Sorry? Oh, I'm sorry, sir. One is ancient origins, just to be, these are books and quoted still, and I will show you a new book that's quoting it. And then there is a new twist to corporatism that was no longer, I would say, a couple of years ago. First, the origin. The anti-Roosevelt, the anti-Rousseau is Joseph de Maistre, no? The most famous of the reactionaries. All the plenty of translations. And she wrote in French. He was a count, but not from France. This idea that man is corrupt and they need authority. Persons cannot rule themselves. If they rule themselves, they go into open violence. They beget tyrants. So what we need is the recognition that this society has a soul, not individual. Society is a block, has a soul, and if you revolt against that, you beget tyrants, Napoleon and all that. So accept the power as it is, because we cannot define power. Power is a mystery. It's opaque to reason. We cannot know what is power, so we only have to still. Sorry. Another point that Carl Schmitt very, very central, let me go quickly with this, is the dialectic of friend-enemy. All human relations are divided between friend and enemy. All my friends, part of the nation, part of the people, and the enemy. And then that's why corporatist politicians look themselves in the mirror of populism. Why? Because populism is the new rule. First, the people has a leader. The leader needs not constraints. Not the constitution. Reality is a mystical relation. Apophatic theology is quoted, you may know what it is. It comes from St. Augustine. It means God cannot be defined. You can define what is not God. That is theology. Now, what is the via negativa, the theologians say, it's you cannot define power. You cannot define the leader. You cannot define people. What you can define is the enemy. No? The enemy, yes. I define myself by my enemies. I indicate who are the terrible people. That was called via negativa. Why use the word raza? Franco wrote a film during the war, 1942, a film, of course, propaganda. It was called raza, race. Race doesn't mean color of your skin or whatever. It means our culture, and our undefined culture. It ends when there's a fantastic military parade, and a child asks his mother, "What is this?" I mean, the parade of victory, of course. He says, "It's raza." No, it's us, raza. We are raza. We are strong, and the rest is the enemy. Now, the other. Absolutisme inefficace is a word used by Frank Ravel, but it means this. You control so much power that you cannot deal with the problems. So, in the main point of what I will just quote the first two. Greed is a tool of idolatry. Competition brings egotism, arrogance, and inequality. Speeches by the Pope. I mentioned the Pope not because I'm anti-religious. I do because he's Argentine, so I feel that I'm acceptable, and I will not be chastised for that. But it's clear point of the new policy disappearing. The organized community is a phrase created by Perón and quoted. I don't know if you can read. The author is called Alexander Dugin, that perhaps you know. Logos Argentino. These are the conferences he gave in Buenos Aires. He came 3 times. Why? To learn about organized community. Of course. Perón said ethics is a correction of egotism, the mutual integration of man and community. Or you can quote Ezra Pound. I quote it because Ezra Pound is now very popular by corporatism. No? Usura rusteth the chisel, rusteth the craft, knoweth the thread, is contra natura. Usura is just lending money, as you know. But it's a moral thing. Lending money is in itself immoral. Well, there is Dugin. Dugin is extremely active in corporatism. And he wrote, he has a larger books that you could find on the internet. Liberalism, when I say liberalism, I speak of an open society, not literally as Americans. Is the total destruction of the organic unity of the people, the collective. No nations but globalism. No religions but human rights. A satanic idea, human rights. Unless, of course, it's represented by the unity. Which is the path? And that reminds me, of course, the Mestre. The path of unity is God, motherland, identity, justice, freedom. The organized community, this is doing, organized from above. The organized community is organized. The twist that I mentioned is also in Carl Schmitt. This new things of geopolitics. Geopolitics as an ideology, not the difference between land and sea. Carl Schmitt wrote a book about it, very quoted, Land and Sea is called, and translated. And then, of course, is Eurasia. The idea of Eurasia is not Russian, it's English. Halford Mackinder, in 1904, gave a conference saying, Eurasia is the center of the world. It's the center of humanity. Who controls the island of the world island, controls Eurasia. Who controls Eurasia controls the world. Could be surprising enough, the world island is Ukraine. No? So it comes back haunting us. The opposite, of course, are the sea, the liberal, open societies. Alfred Meehan wrote about it. You know Alfred Meehan. He was advisor to President Roosevelt. Latin America, Putin says, is a land territory. It's a natural ally of us. No? These, of course, are extreme, but what he meant it is that corporatism is bad, and it's startling. I mean, these ideas were, quoted by Franco, quoted by dictators in Latin America years ago, and then they're coming back. Why? First, because justified authoritarianism. After socialism, you cannot be a socialist. If you're a real socialist, you're going into a disaster, and you're going to be thrown out. You could be Venezuela or whatever. Although Venezuela's nearer this. Populism justifies authoritarianism. All this doctrine is a doctrine of authoritarianism. It has a problem. It leads to economic stagnation, not to economic destruction, like communism. Corporatists destroyed the economy. On the contrary, you could live a very long period of time, stagnated, and living miserably. I can give the Argentine example if you want. But nationalism has a trick. It includes belligerence. Belligerence in the speech, and sometimes belligerence in action. We are in war in Europe, which is, that's not a small feat. Living very far away of that. Putin came to Argentina. The Argentine president praised Putin. Many leaders praised Putin till, of course, it was a war. So that is something that you should be aware. Corporatism is not naive. It's not a funny thing that developing countries use. It's dangerous. It creates a new oligarchy, which is made very strong. New trade unionists, rich, new businessmen allied with trade unions, allied with the government. They cannot compete, and they won't compete. Plenty of examples. And then, of course, this new myth. Poverty is a consequence of inequality. If you look for, we should just change inequality in itself, because the reason of poverty is someone's taking my part. And then we should say the only truth, I would say, in this short speech is dynamic economy breeds pluralism. That's why countries which tend to have a dynamic economy cannot maintain an authoritarian regime. What happens in China, for example? If you tend to go to dynamism, necessarily it would have an open economy. And that's why so many strong-handed or high-handed governments hate dynamism. They hate dynamism because it means that you're going to leave power. So I thank Ned again for bringing this matter, which probably in the past, and now is in the newspapers, is a new school of dictatorship. Thank you very much. I don't want to bother your meal even more if you really have questions, I'll be ready to talk about them.
Thank you very much also for talking about political theology and moving to Carl Schmitt. So the problem with this kind of romanticization of the medievals is with Luther. Luther started this cult of the individual. But I think also in Christian circles in America, it's the problem of the Enlightenment. So how do you navigate? What are the rules, the public rules dictating how you navigate conflict, which are also kind of significant? And I think that move to authoritarianism is the rejection of pluralism on the grounds of the rejection of individuality, but it's also the rejection of any intersubjective navigation of difference with this kind of top-down corporate structure.
There's an extraordinary thing with Luther. You know, Luther was a contemporary of Machiavelli. I quote Machiavelli for several reasons, because he reinvented republicanism, but also because one American corporatist writer, James Burnham, wrote about Machiavellists in the 40s, it's mentioned in all the fascist writers, no? Pareto, Mosca, Robert Mitchell, and all that. So in the United States, they were also forgotten. Luther is extraordinary because when he said, every baptized is a priest, every baptized person is a priest, there's no hierarchy. No hierarchy is minimal. A religion without hierarchy proved very, very dangerous for corporatists. That's why Joseph de Maistre hated Lutherans more than revolutionaries, which is rather surprising. And then this thing of enlightenment, because it's one thing to say, I have the power because the people voted me, and say, like Franco, by the grace of God. That's extreme, of course. No? But this idea that there is a religion based, because the problem with religions, and we're having this problem at home now for things like interruption of pregnancies, is when you speak about law, even about ethics, is one thing, but when someone brings a religious conviction, I mean, it's impossible to debate. How can I convince you of something? It goes into your deepest feelings. No? And that is what it is. That's why, what is the nation or the people? Well, plebiscite of every day, you know, the famous. But if I say, you're against the nation, you're the imperialism, you come and say, enlightened again. I receive. So this via negativa is extremely dangerous. That's why the importance of debate of political ideas and economic ideas. No? That's debate. Even if the debate is senseless, this idea that nothing is forbidden ideologically, and we should have Congress and all that. And I mention this because if Putin had not entered a war, Putin and China would have entered the whole continent. I'm not speaking of the United States. No? Because there's a speech by our present president, although he's very poor, very weak, but he said, we are referring to a continent, no? We are the door open for Russia in this area. No? Now, of course, in a war, you cannot go on like this. But yes, it's true. Ned was also who invited me to speak about Luther, and it was a fantastic discovery.
Okay.
Yes, please. I don't know how
Sorry.
Oh.
Thank you so much, Juan Antonio. Thank you for such a wonderful presentation. I really congratulate you. And I don't know why I can imagine a country which is precisely going through the stages that you perfectly described as corporativism. It is an imaginary country, of course, but I guess that my own belief is that in this imaginary country, the leader is very popular because precisely he's doing those things. And what would be like the solution or the remedy in order to open the people's eyes to see that basically that this imaginary country is going to a catastrophe? What is the solution?
Well, I'll try to put it here, no? But it's true. The problem is not an imaginary country. There are perhaps several real countries that do that in Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe in this case. But the first about this dynamic economy, businessmen are more corporations than trade unions. Trade unions exist everywhere. Protected corporatist entrepreneurs, businessmen, they're very powerful. If you wanted to open, I always tell the same anecdote, I'm sorry someone heard it. We have a terrible conflict in tire companies. trouble. I mean, closed, all of them closed. Some are leaving the country, with the trade union very active. So the Minister of Economy says, oh, we're going to import it. Open imports. Perfect import. So the cars could. The same company say, no. We prefer to close our factories temporarily. And these are foreign companies. We prefer to close, but don't open the economy. Nada. So one of the doors is the economy. Because it's very difficult to be corporatist with an open economy. I think the Americans have discovered that. I don't know if you have a would-be, another imaginary situation. I don't know if you have a would-be corporatist leader of the country, but with an open economy it's very, very difficult. You could have it locally, but in the end, I mean, people compete. So I think one of the entrances is that, and then know that what you have created is protected oligarchs. After all, who owns the big ships? No? Oh, they have Eastern, Southern sounding names. And I'm sorry, it took too long. Oh, there's merit to it.
Yes.
Merit, I think, has a question, which is a friend, and friends have privileges.
I will come back to you. I apologize.
Yeah.
China's
Where does President Xi in China fit into your scheme, and what does that imply about innovation in China, if it does
first
fit in?
things, China's a communist country. So, strictly speaking, I mean, there are people from China here who know the country much better than I do. I apologize to them if I say things which are wrong. But, I've seen in China, it's a communist part of China, and the military, I mean, being active in that sense. So I feel the President Xi of China, who wanted to be a stronger leader, stronger in the sense of more power, is facing some inconveniences, which is, if you want to grow and have a dynamic economy, you cannot be a Latin American dictator, if I may use the term, or a communist dictator. You have to also, in a way, follow a possibility of a more open political system. China is a continent, it's very difficult to, but basically I find this model more applied to certain countries in Europe and in America than in China. Or, of course, China is a central actor, and corporatist leaders love China. Mystery. Do you allow Peter, perhaps? Peter's a friend too. Oh.
So it seems to be family and friends tonight. If I take two of your lines, corporatism leads to economic stagnation and dynamic economy breeds pluralism, the first line definitely applies for Europe. The last line, dynamic economy breeds pluralism, may be referring to the US. So yeah, but I'm quoting you. So would you elaborate on that? Is the second line, this is definitely Europe, and the last line, maybe, hopefully, the US. And one last remark. You have quoted several times Luther, and a few years ago, Nat, you had a conference on Luther, and it's such a pleasure that I learned tonight again about Luther. And with the new table order here, my new friend, Professor Halmer, is sitting here, and we both had an exchange since the conference on that. So, Nat, you were responsible for that relationship.
Thank you. I will be as brief as I can. corporate leads to stagnation. Of course, I mean, Bismarck was a corporatist. Friedrich List, the famous German economist, was a corporatist. And it worked. And it worked, more or less. It did work in Germany. You wonder if those things would work somewhere else. No? Because when we in Latin America apply Friedrich List, it tends to a disaster. So, of course, there are countries and countries. But in any case, there is always this idea that this pervasive interest, mild corporatism, some European countries, protectionist, using the European Union as a protectionist system, is not pushing them into some sort of stagnation, in spite they are extremely competitive in many aspects, because, I mean, European invented everything. That is, I think, is the dynamic economy. The dynamic economy means to open economy with entrepreneurs, with this idea, of course, Ned is a world expert, but this idea that you create new products, that you create new product without the need of theoretical research. So any country, even they're poor, even they are not, I mean, they don't have a great education, but they use the internal capacity of creating new products, new things, new ideas, even if something very simple, I think is a way much better to development, or to at least better their situation, than if they continue to think of corporatist idea, which is what Prebisch thought. I mean, Prebisch was an enemy of Perón. I mean, he was thrown out of the country. He was persecuted. But he gave a theoretical background to prohibit imports, no? To a closed economy, live with our own, vivir con lo nuestro. No? And that is a tragedy. And I feel that also you cannot have an open economy and a competitive economy and this idea of dynamic economy, which anyone can discover a new product, a new procedure, or anything of the sort, and make it big, let's say, without a plural political system. It's impossible. It's completely impossible. In the end, it would take long, depends on the culture, but that's why I think it's so important to give another line to what Ned wrote in his book. I know, Ned, I apologize. I cover myself.
Yes, it's getting a bit late. And I want especially, besides thanking Juan for his stimulating talk as usual, but also thank very much Lizzie Feidelson and Catherine Pikula. Without their amazing abilities and spark, these conferences wouldn't have been possible, believe me. And it's just amazing how wonderful they have been. I don't know how the center would be able to continue without them. Thank you all for participating in this event, and thank you, Juan, for teaching us more about corporatism, and thank all of you. I want to thank all of you for your enthusiasm and attention to our humble program. Thank you.